If you keep that baby, I'll ruin your family and everything you love. The billionaire CEO threatened, giving her money. $50,000. That was the price he put on his own child. For years later, she made him pay every cent back in revenge. Hi, my wonderful friends. Welcome to Mr. William Chronicles, where stories of fallen empires and rising strength reveal life's deepest truths. If you're new here, show some love and hit that subscribe button. Let me speak a blessing over you. May you find the strength to rebuild from the ruins of betrayal, the wisdom to guard your heart without losing its capacity to love, and the clarity to see that the greatest revenge is a life lived fully and freely, beyond the shadow of those who wronged you. Myra's hands trembled against the silk of her dress as she stood in the center of Derek's penthouse office. The city stretched below them through massive windows, a glittering sprawl of lights that seemed to mock the darkness, consuming the space between them. She had rehearsed this moment countless times in her mind, imagined his face softening with wonder, his arms pulling her close the way they had on all those stolen nights when he whispered her name like it was sacred. Instead, Derek stood behind his desk with his jaw locked tight, his eyes holding the kind of cold calculation she had seen him use on rival executives before crushing their careers. The man who had traced poetry onto her skin with his fingertips, who had promised her that what they shared was real, that man had vanished completely. In his place stood someone who looked at her like she was a problem requiring immediate elimination. "I'm not asking for money, Derek," Myra whispered, her voice cracking despite her desperate attempt to hold herself together. "I'm asking you to acknowledge your child. Our child." Before Derek could respond, the door behind Myra opened with a soft click that somehow sounded like a gunshot in the silence. She didn't need to turn around to know who had entered. She could feel the temperature in the room drop by several degrees. Brooke Mercer moved into view with the predatory grace of a woman who had never lost a battle she considered worth fighting. She was everything Myra wasn't: polished, connected, born into the kind of wealth that made Derek's fortune look like pocket change. Her family's board votes had made Derek's empire possible. Their marriage, barely 2 months old, was a merger dressed in wedding white. Brooke's hand settled possessively on Derek's arm as she studied Myra with eyes that held no warmth whatsoever. "50,000 is generous," she said, her voice honeyed and merciless. "Most men in my husband's position would offer far less for this kind of inconvenience." Myra stared at Derek, silently begging him to remember who they had been. All those nights when he swore Brooke meant nothing, when he promised their love was the only real thing in his manufactured world. "You would let this woman dictate what happens to your own child." Something flickered across Derek's face, a ghost of the man she had loved, struggling beneath layers of ice. But Brooke's fingers tightened on his arm, and whatever humanity had surfaced disappeared behind the mask of the businessman who had clawed his way to the top. "She's my wife," Derek said, each word measured in cold. "And you're a chapter I've already closed. Take the money, Myra. Handle this situation. Move on with your life. And if I don't..." The silence that followed made Myra's blood run cold. Derek moved around the desk with slow, deliberate steps until he stood close enough that she could smell his cologne, the same scent that used to make her feel safe, now making her stomach turn with dread. "Your mother works at General Memorial, doesn't she?" His voice was almost gentle, which made his words infinitely more terrifying. "Head nurse in the cardiac unit. 30 years of dedicated service." It would be unfortunate if questions arose about her handling of medication protocols. A single investigation could cost her not just her position, but her license. Myra felt the ground dissolve beneath her feet. "You wouldn't." "And your brother's construction company," Derek continued, as if she hadn't spoken. "He just secured that commercial contract downtown, didn't he? The one he's been working toward for 3 years? I know those developers personally. One conversation and that contract disappears. One phone call and your brother's business collapses. Derek, please. Take the money." His hand reached out to touch her face with a gentleness that felt like mockery. "Go to the clinic. In a few months, this will all feel like a bad dream. I can't give you what you want, Myra. I can't be the man you need me to be. but I can make sure you're taken care of financially. That has to be enough." Mira looked at him for a long moment, memorizing the planes of his face, searching for any trace of the man she had loved. She found nothing but cold calculation and the faint impatience of someone eager to move on to his next meeting. She picked up the envelope and nodded slowly. "Okay, I'll handle it." The relief that flooded Derek's expression made her want to scream, but she kept her face blank as she turned toward the door. His hand caught her wrist, pulling her back for one last kiss that tasted like goodbye and lies and everything she had lost. "I'm sorry," he whispered against her lips. "I wish things could be different." "So do I," Mira replied, and meant it in ways he would never understand. She left his office with the envelope clutched against her chest, rode the elevator down through 40 floors of his glass tower, and walked out into the night air that felt too cold for the season. Her phone buzzed with a text from her mother asking if she wanted dinner, and Mira had to lean against a street lamp to keep from collapsing right there on the sidewalk. But this story doesn't end with a broken woman accepting defeat. Because what Derek didn't know, what he couldn't possibly understand, was that Mira had no intention of going to that clinic. She had taken his money. Yes, she had let him believe he had won. But growing inside her was a life she already loved more fiercely than she had ever loved anything, and no amount of threats would make her destroy it. Back in the penthouse, Derek stared out at the city lights, his expression troubled despite the apparent victory. Brooke watched him from across the room, reading his doubt with the precision of a woman who had made a career of understanding weakness. "You're worried," she observed, her tone neither sympathetic nor accusatory, simply factual. "She's stubborn," Derek admitted. "More stubborn than I expected. She might not go through with it." Brooke's smile was a blade-catching light. "Then we'll make sure she understands the consequences of stubbornness." She moved toward him, her heels clicking against the marble floor. "Leave it to me, darling. I'll handle your little complication personally." Derek turned to look at his wife, and for just a moment, something like unease flickered in his eyes. "What are you going to do?" "Whatever is necessary." Brooke's voice carried the absolute certainty of someone who had never been denied anything she truly wanted. By morning, Mira Ashford will understand exactly what happens to women who threaten our future. She'll disappear so completely, you'll forget she ever existed. And in her small apartment across the city, Mira was packing her belongings with trembling hands, racing against a clock she didn't know was already counting down. She never heard the footsteps in the hallway, never heard the lock being picked with professional efficiency. The first warning she had was the door swinging open to reveal Brooke's brother, a man whose friendly photographs hid something calculating and dangerous around the edges. What happened next would leave Mira unconscious on her apartment floor, bleeding and broken, waking hours later in a hospital bed with a concussion and terror flooding every cell of her body. But her baby survived, and in that hospital room, making a decision that would reshape everything, Mira Ashford died. The woman who walked out the next morning carried a different name, a different destiny, and a fierce determination to turn the cruelty of powerful men into ashes they would choke on. My beautiful family, before we continue this journey together, I need you to do something for me. If this story has already grabbed your heart, hit that subscribe button right now. Then drop a like on this video so others can find it too. And if you are not yet subscribed, then take a moment to subscribe. It tells me you want more stories of strength, survival, and justice. And leave me a comment. Tell me, have you ever had to walk away from someone who showed you their true colors? I want to hear your story. But to understand the depth of Mira's devastation, you need to understand what she lost. You need to see the love that Derek Holden destroyed with his own hands. Mira was 24 when she fell in love with him, the kind of love that consumed her completely, the kind that made her believe in impossible things. She was his executive assistant, hired fresh out of college with stars in her eyes and ambition burning in her chest. Derek was magnetic, brilliant, the kind of man who commanded every room he entered. But Mira saw past the calculated exterior to something softer beneath, something vulnerable that he hid from the rest of the world. Their relationship began with stolen glances across conference tables, late nights at the office that stretched into early mornings, conversations that started about quarterly reports and ended with him telling her about his childhood, his fears, his dreams for a future that wasn't built entirely on acquisition and profit. The first time he kissed her was in his office at midnight, the city sleeping below them, while he confessed that she was the only real thing in his manufactured world. "Everyone wants something from me," he whispered against her lips. "But you just want me. Do you know how rare that is?" Their love became a secret they guarded fiercely. Stolen moments in empty boardrooms. Weekend escapes to hotels where nobody knew his name. His fingers tracing patterns across her skin while he murmured promises that felt unbreakable. But there was always a shadow hanging over them. Brooke Mercer. Derek explained it away with practiced ease. The engagement was arranged years ago, a business transaction between powerful families. Brooke's father controlled board votes that Derek needed for his expansion plans. The marriage would be a formality, nothing more. Paper and ceremony without substance. "I don't love her," Derek swore, his eyes holding Myra's with desperate sincerity. "I could never love someone like her. She's cold, calculating, everything you're not. Just give me time. I'll find a way out of this. I'll find a way for us." And Myra believed him. She believed him through months of hidden romance. Believed him when he said the wedding was being postponed. Believed him when he promised that love would conquer contracts and dynasties. She was still believing him 3 weeks before his wedding, when he showed up at her apartment on a rain-soaked evening with goodbye written all over his face. The rain hammered against Myra's windows as Derek stood in her doorway, unable to meet her eyes. She knew before he spoke a single word. She could feel the ending in the air between them, heavy and inevitable. "The merger can't survive a scandal," he said, his voice hollow. "If anyone discovers what we've been doing, Brooke's family will pull their support. Everything I've built, everything I've worked for, it'll collapse. The board will turn on me. The takeover I've been fighting will go through. I'll lose it all. So you're choosing your company over us." It wasn't a question. "I'm choosing survival." He finally looked at her, and she saw something fracturing behind his eyes. "This is bigger than us, Myra. I have responsibilities you can't understand. People depend on me, employees, investors, entire families who need their paychecks. And what about me?" Her voice cracked despite every effort to hold it steady. "What about the promises you made? You said you'd find a way. You said I was the only real thing in your world. I was foolish to believe that." His jaw tightened. This, us, it was always going to end. I just didn't want to see it. He reached for her, but she stepped back, her arms wrapping around herself like she could hold together the pieces that were already breaking apart. "I never meant to hurt you," Derek whispered. "I wish things could be different. But I have to do this. I have to let you go." Myra said nothing. What was there to say? Every word felt useless against the weight of his decision. He had weighed their love against his empire and found it wanting. Found her wanting. Derek lingered in her doorway for a long moment, rain dripping from his coat onto her floor. Then he turned and walked away, disappearing into the storm while she stood frozen in place, watching the man who had promised her forever vanish from her life. She didn't cry that night. The pain was too deep for tears. She simply sat in darkness, listening to the rain, feeling something inside her shatter into pieces too small to ever reassemble. 2 months passed. 2 months during which Derek married Brooke in a ceremony that made headlines across every business publication in the country. 2 months during which Myra tried to rebuild some semblance of a normal life, while carrying a secret that grew heavier with each passing day. And 2 months during which Brooke Mercer transformed Derek Holden into something unrecognizable. Myra didn't understand it at the time, wouldn't understand it until years later. But Brooke had seen potential in Derek that even he didn't recognize. Not potential for love or happiness, but potential for ruthlessness, for cold calculation, for the kind of strategic cruelty that builds empires on the backs of broken people. Brooke didn't want a husband. She wanted a weapon, And in those 2 months of marriage, she sharpened Derek's edges until he could cut without flinching. When Mira finally gathered the courage to tell him about the pregnancy, she walked into his office expecting to find traces of the man she had loved. Instead, she found a stranger wearing his face, a stranger who offered her money like she was a problem to be solved and threatened her family when she refused to comply. The hospital room was cold and white and smelled like antiseptic. Mira woke slowly, pain throbbing through her skull, her body aching in places she couldn't identify. Machines beeped steadily beside her bed. A nurse with kind eyes checked her vitals and asked gentle questions about what happened. Mira said she had fallen, said she had been clumsy, said anything except the truth, that a man had broken into her apartment and beaten her unconscious to ensure she understood exactly how serious powerful people could be. The doctors confirmed what she already knew with desperate certainty. Her pregnancy was still viable. Her baby had survived. Lying in that sterile room, staring at the ceiling while her head pounded and her heart broke, Mira made a decision that would reshape everything. She could stay and fight, but fighting meant putting her mother and brother in Derek's crosshairs. It meant exposing her child to the kind of people who sent enforcers to deliver messages with their fists. Or she could disappear so completely that Derek and Brooke would have no reason to follow through on their threats. She could protect her family by erasing herself from their world entirely. She chose survival. She chose her daughter's future over justice that might never come. When Mira walked out of that hospital the next morning, she left behind everything she had ever known. Her name, her career, her city, the mother and brother she loved too much to endanger. The woman who boarded a flight that afternoon carried nothing but blood money and fierce determination. She would use Derek's $50,000 to build something he could never destroy. She would transform his cruelty into the foundation of her own empire. And one day, when she was ready, she would return. Now, some of you might be wondering, why didn't she go to the police? Why didn't she expose Derek and Brooke for what they really were? But here's what you need to understand about power. Real power. The kind of power that can end careers with a phone call and destroy families with a whispered word. When you're standing alone against people like that, with no evidence except bruises that will heal and threats that were never recorded, justice isn't guaranteed. What's guaranteed is that they'll see you coming. They'll have time to prepare. And they'll make sure you can never threaten them again. Sometimes the bravest thing you can do is disappear. Sometimes strength looks like silence, until the moment you're ready to roar. Mira wasn't running away. She was running toward something, toward the woman she would become. For years. That's how long it took for the woman Derek Holden tried to erase to become someone he could no longer touch. For years of silence, of rebuilding, of transforming pain into power. While Derek lived his hollow existence in a penthouse prison of his own making, Mira Ashford was building an empire from the ashes of his betrayal. The first year was the hardest. Mira, now living under the name she inherited from the father she never knew, Mira Thorne, survived on Derek's blood money while working double shifts at a diner where the owner didn't ask questions. She served coffee and scrambled eggs to strangers while her daughter, Sienna, slept in a back room the owner let her use. 3 hours of sleep a night became her normal. Fear was her constant companion. But then a letter arrived, forwarded through a chain of legal offices that had been searching for her for nearly 6 years. It was from attorneys representing the estate of James Thorne, a tech billionaire who had abandoned Myra's mother before she was born. Drowning in guilt during his final years, he'd left instructions to find his daughter and deliver her inheritance. The inheritance wasn't overwhelming, but it was life-changing. $8 million and a 5% stake in Thorne Capital Ventures, the venture capital firm her father had founded. Most people would have taken the money and lived quietly. But Mira had spent 6 months as Derek's executive assistant, watching him build an empire through calculated aggression and strategic vision. She had learned more about corporate warfare than he ever realized. She used $20,000 of Derek's money, the very money he'd given her to destroy their child, to buy business textbooks and finance courses. She studied obsessively during Sienna's nap times, filling notebooks with market analyses and investment theories, teaching herself to read balance sheets with the same intensity she had once brought to memorizing Derek's schedule. When Sienna was 8 months old, Mira saw something the old men running her father's firm had completely missed: a biotech startup founded by 3 young women without traditional pedigrees. They had developed a revolutionary diagnostic tool for cardiac conditions, but were being systematically overlooked by investors who couldn't see past their gender and youth. Mira saw their brilliance. She saw the technology's potential to save lives. She bet $4 million, half her inheritance, on them. It was a gamble that terrified her. Failure would mean she had squandered her financial security on a single bet. But she remembered Derek's cold calculation when he threatened her family, and she channeled that memory into steel-spine conviction. The bet paid off spectacularly. Within 18 months, the biotech company was acquired by a pharmaceutical giant for $200 million. Mira's stake was suddenly worth $30 million. She wasn't just surviving anymore. She was building real capital. But money alone didn't make her powerful. What came next required something more difficult than financial risk. It required her to step out of hiding and claim her father's name publicly. She showed up at Thorn Capital Ventures headquarters with her ownership stake and demanded a board seat. She faced down the old men who had been mismanaging her father's legacy for years, systematically exposing their failures with the precision of a surgeon and the ruthlessness of someone who had survived genuine threat. She was 26 years old with a toddler at home and no formal business degree, but she had spent 2 years teaching herself everything they knew while also learning from their mistakes. The battle for control took another full year. Mira built coalitions with other frustrated investors, recruited brilliant analysts from overlooked backgrounds, and positioned herself not just as her father's heir, but as someone with a genuinely superior vision for the firm's future. By the time Sienna turned 3, Mira had tripled the firm's assets under management and established herself as one of the most successful venture capitalists in her sector. She made investments in startups led by founders others dismissed, found companies solving real problems rather than chasing hype, and built a reputation for seeing potential where traditional investors saw only risk. The financial press called her a prodigy, never knowing that every successful investment was driven by the memory of being dismissed and threatened. Every hire of an overlooked founder was an act of revenge against a world that had tried to destroy her when she was most vulnerable. Meanwhile, Derek's life had become a beautifully crafted lie. His marriage to Brooke was a masterpiece of polite distance, separate bedrooms, carefully coordinated public appearances, and a shared empire built on mutual ambition rather than affection. They were devastatingly effective together, their loveless marriage proving that when neither person cares enough to be wounded, neither can hurt the other. Derek's company thrived. Acquisitions and expansions put his name in business journals. Invitations to speak at conferences where younger executives hung on his every word. Brooke's family opened doors that had been previously closed, their influence smoothing the path for deals that should have taken years to negotiate. On paper, Derek Holden had everything a man could want. In reality, he had built a magnificent prison and called it success. Late at night, when sleep wouldn't come, he thought about Mira in the fragmented way of someone trying to remember a dream. He had tried to find her in those first weeks after she disappeared, called her disconnected number, went to her apartment, and found it empty. Her mother claimed ignorance with tears in her eyes. Her brother had threatened to break his jaw if he came around again. Eventually, Derek stopped looking. She had taken his money and solved the problem, had done exactly what he demanded. If some small part of him wondered whether she had actually gone through with the termination, or if somewhere in the world his child existed, he buried that question under layers of work and ambition. But the void her absence created never filled. No amount of success could silence the ghost of what he had destroyed. The corporate summit was the kind of event Derek usually avoided. Too many boring presentations and forced networking. But Brooke's father had insisted his presence would signal strength to their shareholders. Derek sat through the morning sessions with his mind elsewhere, responding to emails on his phone, barely registering the speakers who droned on about market trends. He was considering leaving early when the moderator introduced the afternoon keynote speaker. Something in the name made him look up from his screen. Please welcome Mira Thorne, Managing Director of Thorne Capital Ventures, who will be speaking about innovative approaches to venture funding in emerging markets. Derek felt the world narrow to a single point of focus as a woman walked onto the stage. Her silhouette was backlit by presentation screens, her presence commanding the kind of attention that came from genuine authority rather than borrowed influence. She wore a tailored suit in deep charcoal, her hair pulled back in a style that emphasized the elegant lines of her face. And when she smiled at the audience, Derek felt his heart stop and restart with painful force. It was Mira, and yet it wasn't. Because the woman on that stage carried herself like someone who had never been afraid of anything, who had never stood trembling in his office, accepting his threats. She spoke with easy confidence, dismantling traditional investment models with sharp intelligence, backing her theories with concrete data that made seasoned investors lean forward in their seats. Derek couldn't hear a word of it. His entire focus was consumed by the impossible reality of her presence, the way she moved, the laugh that escaped when someone asked a particularly absurd question. She had transformed into something unreachable, something that existed in a stratosphere far above the girl he had threatened with his envelope of blood money. When the presentation ended to enthusiastic applause, Derek was already moving toward the stage, his body operating on instinct rather than thought. He needed to reach her, needed to understand how this transformation had happened. But Mira was faster, already being ushered backstage by conference staff. Derek followed anyway, his press credentials getting him past security, his determination carrying him through backstage corridors until he caught sight of her near the speaker's lounge. She was talking to another executive, her body language relaxed and professional. And standing beside her was a young girl, perhaps 4 years old, holding the hand of a woman who was clearly a nanny. The child had dark curls that caught the fluorescent light, a small face that held features Derek recognized from his own childhood photographs. And when she laughed at something the nanny said, the sound hit him like a physical blow to the chest. Mira must have felt his stare because her head turned sharply, her eyes locking onto his across the corridor. For a moment, everything else ceased to exist except the weight of that gaze, the way her expression shifted from surprise to something colder than hatred, something that looked like complete indifference. She said something to her companion, touched the child's shoulder gently, and walked toward Derek with a measured stride of someone approaching an unpleasant but necessary confrontation. "Mr. Holden," she said when she reached him, her voice professionally neutral in a way that felt worse than anger would have. "I didn't realize you would be attending this summit." Derek couldn't form words, his throat closing around all the questions that demanded answers. He looked past her at the little girl who was now examining something in the nanny's purse, at the dark curls and the shape of her small hands, at the undeniable reality of her existence. When he finally managed to speak, his voice came out rough and unfamiliar. "You kept her." "I kept my daughter," Mira corrected, each word carefully enunciated. "She has nothing to do with you." "She has my eyes," Derek said, and watched something flicker across Myra's face before her expression locked down again into that terrible blankness. "She has her own eyes," Mira replied. "Her own life, one you're not part of and never will be." She turned to leave, and Derek's hand shot out, catching her wrist the way he had that last night in his office. But Mira jerked away from him with such force that several people turned to stare. "Don't," she said, her voice dropping to a whisper that cut deeper than any scream. "Don't touch me. Don't speak to me. Don't pretend you have any right to know anything about my life." She was already walking away, already gathering her daughter and the nanny, already disappearing through an exit that led to the parking garage. Derek stood frozen in that corridor, aware of curious eyes on him, aware that his world had just shifted on its axis in a way he couldn't begin to process. She had kept their daughter. She had vanished with his child and rebuilt herself into something powerful and untouchable. She had survived him, thrived despite him, and looking at her now was like staring at the sun after years in darkness. My beautiful family, if you are still with me, if this story of transformation has touched something in you, then I need you to show some love right now. Hit that like button, subscribe to the channel if you haven't already, and let me know in the comments what you think Mira should do next. Your engagement tells the algorithm that stories of strength and redemption matter, that they deserve to be heard. Derek's obsession consumed him. The image of Mira transformed, untouchable, magnificent, and the little girl with his eyes haunted his every waking moment. The cold, efficient machinery of his mind, once devoted solely to corporate conquest, now fixated on a single impossible goal, undoing what could not be undone. He stood at the floor-to-ceiling window of his penthouse, the city lights blurring into a meaningless constellation of other people's lives. Brooke entered, her presence announced by the sharp click of her heels on marble. She didn't need to ask. She had seen the security reports, had watched him retreat into a silence more profound than their usual distance. "She's back," he stated, the words feeling inadequate for the seismic shift her return represented. "I know." Brooke's voice was calm, analytical. She came to stand beside him not as a wife, but as a business partner assessing a liability. Mira Thorne. Quite the Phoenix act. But she's still just a woman, Derek. A venture capitalist in a world we dominate. She is not a threat to this company. "You didn't see her," he whispered, the rawness in his tone betraying him. "I saw enough." Brooke turned, her gaze as sharp and cold as a diamond. "I don't care about your past affairs. I never have. This marriage works because we are both pragmatic. But what I will not tolerate is your sentimentality threatening our bottom line. Your fixation is a distraction. And it's not that simple. It is exactly that simple." Her voice dropped, losing its polished edge and revealing the steel beneath. "You are becoming a liability. You're distracted in meetings. You're chasing ghosts. If your personal turmoil affects the stability of this company, I will be forced to take measures to protect my family's investment." The threat was unspoken but absolute. Derek heard it clearly. He had seen her dismantle rivals with less provocation. Yet, he couldn't let go. He began engineering encounters. He accepted speaking engagements at conferences where he knew she would be. He arranged business meetings with companies her firm had invested in. Each interaction was a study in professional torture. Mira was a fortress of polite indifference. She treated him with the detached courtesy she would extend to any business acquaintance. Her eyes never warming, her voice never yielding. She gave him no opening, no crack in her armor through which the man she once loved could seep back in. He watched her in boardrooms, a symphony of lethal grace and precise logic. She commanded respect not through intimidation, but through undeniable competence. The spaces that had once intimidated her now seemed dull in comparison to her overwhelming presence. What Derek, in his single-minded focus, failed to see was that Mira wasn't just moving on. She was watching him back. With the same strategic mind that had built her empire from nothing, she was studying his weaknesses, analyzing the cracks in his foundation. She saw the desperation in his pursuit, the hollow man inside the powerful shell. And she was waiting, patiently, for the perfect moment to show him that some consequences are merely delayed, not denied. That moment arrived with a hostile takeover attempt from a European conglomerate. Derek's company, for all its paper strength, was suddenly vulnerable. And the one firm with the resources to throw him a lifeline was Thorne Capital Ventures. The irony was a bitter pill he had no choice but to swallow. He was now the one begging for mercy from the woman he had once tried to destroy. The meeting was held in a sterile conference room, a space designed for transactions devoid of history or heart. Mira arrived exactly on time, flanked by two associates who stood like sentinels, making it clear this was strictly business. She listened to his pitch with focused attention, her questions sharp and intelligent, probing the exact vulnerabilities the Europeans were exploiting. She was, he realized with a sinking heart, genuinely evaluating the opportunity. She was every bit the brilliant capitalist he had trained her to be. When he finished, she sat back, steepling her fingers. "Your numbers are solid, Derek. Your growth trajectory is impressive. Your market position is defensible." She paused, letting the professional praise hang in the air before her gaze sharpened, piercing through every defense he had. "But I have one question. Why should I help you?" The associates shifted uncomfortably. Derek's own team stiffened. "This is business," he managed, the words sounding weak. "Your firm identifies strong investments. My company represents that." "Business," she repeated, a flicker of dark amusement in her eyes. "You think you can separate the financial from the personal? You think I can look at your balance sheets without seeing you shove that envelope across your desk? Without hearing you threaten my mother's career, my brother's livelihood?" The room went utterly still. "That was 4 years ago," he said, his voice quiet. "I was a different person. I made choices I regret. Choices that haunt me." "Regret is easy, Derek," she countered, leaning forward. Her voice was intimate, and therefore more cutting. "Regret costs you nothing. It's a feeling you have in private while the people you hurt live with the actual consequences." She stood, her associates rising with her. "I'm not investing. I'm not saving you from the natural outcome of building your empire on the backs of people you broke. Mira, please. Let me make this right. Money, resources, anything you and Sienna need." "We don't need anything from you," she said, gathering her things with brutal efficiency. "I have more money than you'll ever see. I have a life you can't touch. A daughter you'll never know. The only thing you can give me now is your permanent absence." She walked out, leaving him standing in the wreckage of his desperation, his team avoiding his eyes. That evening, he went to Brooke. He found her in her home office, reviewing documents. He told her about the meeting, about Myra's refusal, about the child. Brooke didn't look up. "I warned you. I want a divorce." Now, she looked at him. Her expression wasn't one of hurt, but of cold, calculated assessment. "You'll care very much when my family pulls our board votes. You'll care when the Europeans take everything you built. But by all means, Derek, let's get a divorce. I'll have my lawyers draw up the papers." She had been prepared for this, perhaps for years. The collapse was swift and merciless. Brooke's secession was a masterclass in corporate warfare. She had built loyal partnerships that answered to her, not him. When she left, she took them with her. The board turned on him. The European offer became aggressive, smelling blood in the water. Within weeks, the empire Derek Holden had built was a smoking ruin. The magnificent prison he had called success had burned to the ground, and he was left standing in the ashes, finally understanding the true cost of his choices. He had lost it all: his company, his wife, the woman he had loved, the daughter he had denied. And there, in the ashes of his own making, Derek finally understood the price of his cruelty. My beautiful family, if you have ever witnessed a downfall that was deserved, hit that like button. Subscribe to Mr. William Chronicles, and let me know in the comments, what should true justice for Derek look like now? Rock bottom wasn't a sudden impact. It was a slow, suffocating descent into a darkness of his own making. The divorce papers arrived, thick and heavy with finality. Brooke's lawyers had been thorough, dismantling their shared life with surgical precision. She took the penthouse, the vacation properties, the art collection, everything that had been part of their carefully constructed facade. But worse than the loss of assets was the timing. Her filing was perfectly synchronized with her family's announcement that they were selling their controlling stake in his company. It was a death blow, delivered with the cold efficiency Brooke had always possessed. The board meeting was a public execution. Men who had once hung on his every word now looked at him, as if he were contaminated. Brooke's father spoke with a veneer of regret that fooled no one, citing concerns about leadership judgment as the reason for their withdrawal. The unspoken truth, the story of Mira and the child, hung in the air, a ghost everyone could see, but no one acknowledged. Derek sat through it, his hands clenched under the table, feeling the foundations of his life crumble into dust. By the end of the meeting, 3 more board members resigned. The European conglomerate, sensing the kill, increased their takeover offer. The vultures were circling. He tried to fight. He presented alternative financing, desperate strategies. But the damage was too deep. The media, fed carefully curated leaks, painted him as a reckless, morally compromised playboy whose personal failings had destroyed a corporate giant. Tabloids ran photos of him looking haggard, while Brooke appeared in staged interviews, the picture of dignified strength. His company's stock plummeted. His remaining executives updated their resumes in plain sight. The office, once a temple to his ambition, became a hollowed-out shell where people came only to witness the final collapse. He started drinking. He stopped shaving. The consulting position the Europeans offered him was a pity gesture, a face-saving way to ease him out, and he knew it. He stopped showing up. The money dwindled. The friends vanished. And through the haze of self-pity and shame, one thought became an obsession. His daughter. The security report he'd commissioned months earlier had included her preschool address. He had memorized it. And now, with nothing left to lose and no self-respect left to restrain him, he found himself parked across the street from the fenced playground in a rented car, watching. The first time he saw her, his breath caught in his throat. She was wearing a yellow dress, her dark curls bouncing as she ran across the playground. She was real. She was perfect. And she was a living, breathing monument to his greatest sin. He returned the next day, and the day after that. He learned her schedule. He knew which woman was her nanny. He never approached, never spoke. He just watched, a ghost haunting the edges of her life, collecting stolen moments like a miser hoarding gold. He told himself he was just making sure she was safe. He was her father, wasn't he? He had a right to know she was okay. It was a lie, and he knew it. This wasn't about her safety. It was about his desperate, gnawing need. He was crossing a line, and with each passing day, the line faded further into the distance. The breaking point came on a Tuesday. The nanny was late. He watched from his car as the other children were picked up one by one, until only his daughter remained. He saw her sitting on the school steps, her small shoulders straight, trying to be brave. He saw her eyes scanning the parking lot, growing more worried with each passing minute. After 20 minutes, something primal overrode his better judgment. The instinct to protect his child, no matter how twisted the circumstances, propelled him out of the car and across the street. The teacher immediately stepped in front of the girl, her body tense. "Can I help you, sir?" I couldn't help but notice she's been waiting a long time," Derek said, keeping his distance, his hands visible. "Is everything all right? Her ride is delayed. We've contacted her mother. Someone will be here shortly." Her tone was polite but firm, a clear dismissal. He nodded, started to turn away, but then the little girl looked directly at him. He saw the fear she was trying so hard to hide. He crouched down, ignoring the teacher's sharp intake of breath. "Hey there," he said softly. "I know waiting is really hard, but I bet your mom is on her way right now." "My nanny got sick," she said, her small voice trembling. "Mama is in a meeting. I'm supposed to be patient, but I don't like being the last one here." His heart shattered. Being patient is tough, but you're doing a really excellent job of it. Before he could say more, a car screeched into the lot. Mira erupted from the driver's side, her face a mask of pure panic. When her eyes landed on him, crouched near her daughter, her expression transformed into something feral, a combination of fury and terror that made him recoil. He straightened, backing away with his hands raised. "I was just leaving." But Mira was already past him, gathering her daughter into her arms, running her hands over her as if checking for injuries. "Are you okay? Did he touch you? Did he say anything to you?" "He was nice, Mama," the girl said, confused. "He told me I was being patient." Myra's eyes locked on his, promising a vengeance that would make his corporate downfall feel like a gentle reprimand. "Get away from us." He stood frozen on the sidewalk as she bundled their daughter into the car and sped away. He had done the one thing he swore he wouldn't. He had become the monster in their story. He had made her afraid in her own world. The call from her lawyer came less than an hour later. A temporary restraining order was being filed. Any further contact would result in criminal charges for stalking. The finality of it broke him. He wasn't a misunderstood man seeking redemption. He was a threat, a predator. His presence in their lives was a source of fear, not a potential for healing. He drank himself into a stupor that night. In the morning, hungover and hollow, he called his brother. For 2 hours, he confessed everything. The affair, the threats, the money, the stalking. He laid his soul bare. His brother listened, and when Derek was finished, he said quietly, "You can't fix what you broke, Derek. But every day you stay there, you're just picking at a wound that needs to heal. Maybe you need to leave. Maybe your presence in their city is punishment for them, not penance for you." The words were a brutal, necessary truth. His suffering wasn't noble. It was selfish. He was forcing them to live with his shadow. He started packing that afternoon. He took a job on the other side of the country, a humble position that paid a fraction of his old salary. He began seeing a therapist. On his last night in the city, he drove past Myra's building one final time, not stopping, just acknowledging the space where his daughter lived and thrived without him. He wasn't seeking redemption. He was finally accepting his role. He was the villain in their story. And the only decent thing left for the villain to do was to exit the stage. The call came on an ordinary Tuesday, 6 months after Derek had vanished from their city. Mira stared at the unfamiliar number with East Coast area code, her heart performing a painful, familiar stutter. She knew, with a certainty that settled deep in her bones, who it was. Sienna had been asking questions, not constantly, but with the piercing clarity of a 4-year-old noticing the architecture of her world. "Why don't I have a daddy like Lily does? Does my father know I'm good at dancing?" The questions were a quiet earthquake in the foundation Mira had so carefully built. She answered on the 3rd ring, her voice carefully neutral. "Derek." He sounded older. The polished edge of the billionaire CEO sanded down into something quieter. "Mira, I know I have no right to call, but I had to. Are you both okay?" "Sienna has been asking questions about her father," she said, the admission feeling like pulling a shard of glass from an old wound. The silence on the other end was long, filled with the weight of his regret. When he spoke, his voice was thick. "How do you want to handle that? What feels right to you? I don't want to complicate your life or confuse her. But if she's asking, I don't want my absence to create a void filled with fantasies." It was the right response, not a demand. Not a plea, a question, an offering of control. "I don't know what the right answer is," Mira admitted, the truth feeling strangely liberating. "Part of me wants to protect her from the complicated truth, but another part thinks that's my damage to process, not hers. She deserves to know she has a father who exists, who knows about her." "We're different," Derek said, the past tense hanging between them. "Are different," Mira corrected softly after a long pause. Present tense. "Because I've been thinking. Keeping you completely out of her life forever might not be the protective choice I thought it was." She heard his breath catch, a ragged, hopeful sound. "What does that mean? Practically?" "I don't know yet," she said, and it was the most honest thing she'd said to him in years. "Maybe it means you meet once, somewhere neutral, so she can see you're a real person. Maybe it means occasional updates. Maybe it means nothing more than me telling her the truth in a way she can understand." They talked for nearly an hour. Derek asked careful, thoughtful questions. What did Sienna love? What made her laugh? What was she afraid of? Mira found herself answering, describing their daughter's obsession with dinosaurs, her fear of thunderstorms, her insistence on mismatched socks. He listened, and then, hesitantly, he shared something. "I've been buying children's books. For months. A collection I'll probably never give to her. Stories about dragons. It makes me feel connected to her, somehow." The admission undid her. The man who had threatened her family wouldn't have bought children's books for a child he might never meet. 3 weeks later, Mira found herself on a park bench, Sienna's small, warm hand in hers. The spring sun was warm on their faces. She watched as a man approached across the grass, his steps measured, his posture tense. He looked different, softer. The expensive suits were replaced with simple, clean clothes. This was Derek Holden, stripped bare. He sat on the far end of the bench, maintaining a respectful distance. His eyes, full of a nervous awe, went straight to Sienna. "Hi, Sienna," he said, his voice gentle. "My name is Derek. It's really nice to finally meet you." Sienna studied him with frank curiosity. "You were at the hospital," she declared after a moment. "When my heart was broken, Mama said you helped the doctors fix me." His eyes glistened. "I tried to help a little bit. The doctors did all the real work. But I'm really glad they could fix your heart. Your mom tells me you're already back to dancing." "I can do 12 pirouettes now without falling," Sienna announced proudly. "That's more than anyone else in my class." "Do you like dancing?" "I'm terrible at dancing," Derek admitted with a small, genuine smile. "But I love watching people who are good at it." They talked for 20 minutes. He listened to her with his whole being, his focus absolute. He never tried to claim significance, never overstepped. When Sienna, with the brutal honesty of a child, asked, "Why do I have a daddy like my friends?" Derek's expression flickered with pain. He recovered, his voice careful. "You do have a father, Sienna. Sometimes parents can't be together for complicated grown-up reasons, but that doesn't mean they don't care. Your father cares about you very much. He thinks about you every day." Sienna tilted her head. "Are you my father?" Derek's eyes shot to Mira, asking for permission. She gave a slight, almost imperceptible nod. "Yes," he said, the words simple, profound, and heavy with emotion. "I'm your father, and meeting you today is one of the best things that's ever happened to me." Sienna processed this. "Why can't you be part of my life?" "Because sometimes parents make mistakes," he said, his voice breaking. "Really big mistakes that hurt people they care about. And sometimes those mistakes mean they don't get to have the family they want. But that doesn't change how much I care about you." When it was time to go, Sienna waved goodbye with unself-conscious friendliness. As Mira led her away, she looked back once. Derek was still on the bench, his head in his hands, his shoulders shaking. That evening, after Sienna was asleep, Mira stood at her window. There would be no fairy tale ending, no full forgiveness. The wounds were too deep, the scars too permanent. But perhaps there could be something smaller, something more honest. A fragile, carefully managed space where a flawed man could have a small, supervised role in his daughter's life. Not because he deserved it, but because she deserved to know the truth of her own story. Some bridges burn so completely that all you can do is learn to walk on the ash. And if you're lucky, you might find a way to build something small and careful in the scorched earth. Something that honors the devastation while making space for a different kind of future. It wasn't a happy ending. It was an honest beginning. My beautiful family, this journey of betrayal, strength, and fragile hope is now complete. If this story moved you, show me by hitting the like button and subscribing to Mr. William Chronicles for more powerful tales of the human heart. Now, I want to hear from you. What does redemption truly mean? Can some bridges ever be rebuilt? Share your thoughts in the comments below.